Okay, good evening everyone. Welcome to our weekly question and answer session. I think the audio is better. Let me know if you could, if it's still low. You'll hear it. It sounds like it's too slow. If you compare it to the last video, the audio sounded like it was too slow. Somehow it isn't too slow, so that's kind of confusing, but it sounds very deep. So hopefully that's been fixed. Luckily it didn't didn't make it difficult to listen to. Just kind of distracting, I suppose. Okay, so without further ado, we're answering questions on our meditation site, so no adding new questions. If you add new questions, I may or may not answer them. I may wait till next week. But we have 14 questions. We had a couple more and I did delete a couple, so again, if you feel like your question was wrongly deleted, you can meditate on it. And if you still feel like it was wrongly deleted, you're welcome to submit it again. Is it okay to meditate in a chair, or should I challenge myself by sitting on the floor? Well, it's good to challenge yourself. It's okay to sit in a chair. So it's not an either-or situation. Sitting on the floor, if it's a challenge, particularly it's probably a challenge in terms of pain, so it's a question of how challenging is it. If it's to the point where you just drive yourself crazy, then you want to take it slowly, but it also is an indication that you have I was going to say mental problems. You have mental problems, but not in the way we say it in English. You have mental problems in the sense that you have an aversion to pain. That's a mental problem, literally speaking. So it's something that would be great if you could work out, because then you wouldn't have that mental problem of being subjected or vulnerable to pain. So it's a great challenge to take up and to accomplish. So definitely, I mean, what you don't want is to be running away from pain always. You don't want to cultivate the aversion to pain by running away from it. That just makes things worse. It makes the pain worse, really. So if you're always avoiding it by sitting in a chair, well, you're going to run into problems in the long run. Here we have a quote from Mahasi Sayadaw. And so the first thing I'll say is that, I mean, a lot of the English translations are not that great, or not perfect. They're actually quite impressive. But I wouldn't rely on an English translation of what Mahasi says entirely, in all the nuances. So, but what he's saying here is you have to understand what is meant by suffering. So, to put it simply, we'll talk about two types of suffering. The suffering that we understand generally is when you react to something. Right? In Buddhism, this is a valid explanation of suffering. So you experience pain, and well, the pain isn't really suffering, but you don't like it, and that's suffering. It's because you don't like it. Sometimes you experience pain when you're doing sports or exercising, and you really don't feel upset about it. You feel actually good about it. So you can see that the pain isn't really the problem. It's totally our mind state. So in that case, you're right to question this and to say, hey, wait a minute. Definitely our craving right now, our reactions right now, that's what's causing us suffering. But here Mahasi says, present craving is not the origin of present suffering. It's the origin of suffering in a future life. So what he's talking about is actually an equally important understanding of suffering, and that's that everything that arises has the quality in it of suffering, of dukkha. I think suffering's not a great translation, but it's in the ballpark, because what it means is that these things are not valuable in the sense of, if I cling to this, it's going to do something good for me. They don't have that quality. They have the quality of, it's like a fire has the quality of heat, but only if you touch it. If you don't touch it, you won't get burnt. But you still say that fire is hot. But the fire in itself, the heat is only a part of experience. When you go and, if you put your hand in it, you'll get burned. And so when we say that everything that arises, every experience has a quality of suffering, it's still related to experiences, but it's also called suffering in itself. It's called something that is not capable of making you happy. You think, hey, that's happiness. It won't be happiness. This is going to make me happy. It's not going to make you happy. So we call it dukkha. So what he means is that in this life, our life comes about because of past craving, because of craving before we were born. We can't help that. All the suffering of this life, suffering in the sense of all the experiences that we have to have. And if you want to talk conventionally, also all the bad experiences we're going to have. So not getting what we want, getting what we don't want, old age, sickness, death, all these things. All that is not because of our craving right now. And it's not going to be mitigated by that. You think, okay, I stop craving, so that means I don't have to get old, sick, and die? Well, of course not. That means I don't have to meet with all sorts of bad things? No, of course not. You'll still meet with all that suffering. It's just not the suffering you're thinking about. I've kind of conditioned you all to think of suffering as our reaction, because that's crucial in understanding Buddhist conception of suffering. You don't actually suffer from the suffering if you're enlightened. On the one hand, now you do technically suffer because you have to, you have to get sick, you have to get old, you have to die, and so on and so on. But that's only technically. Your mind is so much at peace that you're invulnerable to it. You're invincible, even in the face of suffering. So that's, you have to understand it's being used in different ways. But it's a good question. But what his view, I mean, he's absolutely correct. He's stating something, just he's talking differently. I mean, what he's talking about is something important. That we say the cause of suffering is actually, in one sense, stuff that happened in the past life. And so, in some sense, the only way we can be free from suffering is when we die in this life. If we have no craving left, then we don't have to come back and experience all sorts of suffering. But that's only in one sense. For practical purposes, we talk in a different way, and we say, it's your reactions, and if you see things clearly, you can't really call it suffering, because you're not suffering from it. Again, this, I think, as soon as many people get on this website, it stops working. So clearly there's some limit that's being met. And we've talked about this before, and my IT team assures us that there's no such limit, but I don't believe them. Oh, now it's working again. What's going on here? Okay. How do I raise my self-esteem? You're in the wrong place. You're asking the wrong person. I feel like most of my life is affected, it's affected by what I think of myself. People have told me that I am smart, but I can't advance in math or any other subject without getting sad and frustrated. Well, part of why you get sad and frustrated may be your concern about self. Most likely is the fact that you have a sense of self-esteem, which you should get rid of. You should have no self-esteem, because it's useless for you to compare yourself to others, to hold yourself up to some standard that you have to be, and then get frustrated when you don't meet it, and so on, or even just stress in order to meet it. I mean, what does it mean? What is the self? Your self, in terms of everything in this life, is meaningless. Most religions realize that, most spiritual practices realize that. They still believe in self, but they say, all this stuff, I'm good at math, that's not self. So they'll say things like the self has a higher purpose. Of course it has to have a higher purpose, because math is something you're going to forget when you get old and you're going to lose when you die. So that certainly is not self. But Buddhism goes deeper and says, any kind of attachment to the idea of self, self-esteem, is going to lead you to be reactionary when people, as you say, when you're affected by what people think of you. You're very happy and pleased when they speak good about yourself. When they speak bad about yourself, you feel threatened, and you feel like you have to defend yourself, or you feel sad, or you feel worthless. Well, guess what? You know what I'm going to say next. You are worthless. We're all worthless. Because worth is just a measure based on the individual. What does it mean to say worth something? You could say, in the context of enlightenment, insight meditation is worthwhile. In the context of Buddhist practice, your teacher is worth something. Someone said that I'm worth something because I'm teaching them, but it's in the context of your practice. Those are only really concepts. Reality is not worth anything. So when I say you're not worth anything, the reality of you is just experiences. And so to say worth something is really, it's meaningless in that context. When you see something, is that worth something? What would it mean to say seeing is worth something? Seeing is. It has no value attached to it. It only is an experience. The problem really is that we put values on things. We say this is worth, this is good, this is bad, and then we judge and react and suffer as a result. Things just are. Reality is not, it sounds so dismal to say nothing is worth anything, but it's actually so liberating and broadening, because suddenly reality is, you have the whole spectrum of reality. You're not confined to this small, meaningless life as a human being that really is just attachment to meaningless things. You have reality, you have truth. If that makes any sense. Are you aware of people getting off their psychiatric drugs with the help of mindfulness and metta? Metta, not really, but mindfulness, without experiencing the so many unwanted withdrawal effects. Well, you can't avoid withdrawal effects, but you can be free from your reactions to them. Many of the withdrawal effects are going to be reactions, so it's because there's a lot of habits associated, mental habits associated with it. So you can't turn off your mind, your mental habits. So yeah, there is no way to avoid withdrawal effects. As far as getting off the drugs, I do have one experience fairly recently of a man in Canada here who, with my help, was able to almost get off them. But then I was suddenly told that I couldn't help him get off the drugs because I was dangerously close to breaking the law, or it's basically impersonating a physician or something like that. I don't know if it's breaking the law, but it's very dangerous legally speaking, apparently, so I stopped. But I have seen good results, and I can't think of any instance. I do know some people who have talked to me and said through the practice on their own, watching my videos or practicing with some other, with other methods, they were able to get off their drugs. But it's highly dependent on the individual. So it's highly case by case, depending on how serious it is and how serious the person is and what sort of abilities they have in their mind. How does mindfulness protect a person from being hurt by others? So it can't stop you from being hurt by others, but it can stop you from being hurt by others. I ask, what can one person do to another person? And if we think in an ultimate sense, the only thing one person can do to another person is present them with experiences, with a change in their experiences, or with experiences that they wouldn't have experienced otherwise. All of those experiences are still seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling, or thinking. Those things people can do to us. Now you can close your eyes so you don't see, but if they catch you, they certainly can make it so that you have to see things, right? Or you have to hear things, or you have to smell, or taste, or feel, or think things. That people can do to you. They can inflict pain, physical pain. Physical pain being a feeling, a bodily feeling. What they can't do is hurt you in the sense of make you upset, make you stressed, make you sad. I think that's a simplistic statement, because certainly they very easily can, and we all have experiences of how people can do this. But we don't get that that's a conditioned response, and those conditioned responses can be changed. So mindfulness, your question about mindfulness protects, because mindfulness prevents a reaction. Even momentarily, well, you still have bad habits. So someone says something and you get angry. Even though you still have that habit, at the moment when you say to yourself, hearing, you don't get angry. And so there it protects you from being hurt in terms of getting suffering from it. Normally someone says something and they scare you, or they make you sad. But when you say hearing, you don't get sad, or you don't get afraid, or so on. And then, of course, when you're sad already and you say sad, it doesn't continue, because it doesn't lead to more thoughts, more saddening thoughts. It keeps you present, seeing things just as they are. Mindfulness is designed to create objectivity, to cultivate seeing things just as they are. Okay, here's some complicated questions. I don't think I fully understood everything in this, but I'll make a stab at it. So it appears to take a moment for me to reestablish the context of my surroundings. You ask, what is happening here? I don't particularly like questions like this. It's not exactly the best, because it sounds like you're asking for some kind of theory, and I don't really have one or care for one. What's interesting is that happened, and I'm not exactly clear what you're talking about, but kind of. We suddenly jumped to 22 questions. I don't know what's going on. I don't know this. 13? Okay. Sorry, I was distracted. This interface is changing. It's jumping around. So what's more interesting is that it is happening. And when you notice that, you should say knowing, or noticing, because it doesn't really matter what happens or why it's happening. It's just, this is happening, and that's what we're interested in. So rather than delving into some kind of, I think you talk about the brain, your other question is about the brain. Where is the attention when it switches from seeing to hearing? Again, not really pertinent. What's interesting is that it is happening, and whatever is happening, you note that. So I'm not really keen to delve into questions like that. This is a new, no, wait. Oh yeah, this is an old, this was here. Oh, it's got days, 4 days ago. Are the effects of meditation unconscious? If not, are they conscious? But it's an interesting question. I mean, it sounds kind of, this is theory, but it's not really. I mean, it's about retraining a non-aware mind, whatever that might mean. Or is it conscious in that you consciously learn things? And it's the latter. You consciously learn things about reality. I suppose some of it feels unconscious because suddenly you're changed. But that's just because we aren't clear on cause and effect. We don't understand how changes in this consciousness lead to changed results. But it very much is conscious in the sense that your clear vision, I mean, even just saying, it's just, again, we don't understand the relationship, but even you just saying rising is going to give results. That one moment is wisdom. It's hard to understand. My teacher used to say, knowing the rising, knowing the falling, that's wisdom. And you think, what? So when I say, where's the wisdom in that? A very deep question. Most people think, no, come on, there's no wisdom there. Once you understand that we're saying rising, knowing that this is rising, knowing that that's rising, once you understand that that's wisdom, then you'll get this relationship, how that is actually changing you. Until then it seems kind of magical. Like, wow, hey, this is somehow I'm more peaceful and so on. Okay, here's a question that I think we get often, and again, it's okay, it's an okay question, but it's a little bit speculative. I mean, so the question is, so because we always cling to things, since you are teaching meditation, is your mind not clinging to the practice of meditation? So again, I don't want to talk about myself, but we get this question about, well, what about attachment to meditation? I mean, not everything we do is... I just got logged out. This thing has a mind of its own. This is totally... either there's someone behind the scenes playing around with it, or it's sentient. My computer has gained sentience. This website has, anyway. No, I can't get back in. I mean, kudos to our IT team. I mean, people put this together on a volunteer basis. This was back in. So I really appreciate what they've done, but it really feels like we need a better server, some bigger pipe or something like that. More data can... It really feels like we're backlogged here. Anyway. It's a good teaching. It helps us understand impermanence, suffering, non-self. Maybe it was a design. It was a feature, not flaw. We don't want it working perfectly, or then we would have a sense of self we could control. So okay, that's a good point. Let's not change it. Let's keep it impermanent, so we can all be mindful of the changes, the unpredictability of it. So, okay, can you be attached to meditation? Certainly you can. That's not quite your question. But your question is more like, well, you practice meditation or you teach meditation. Doesn't that mean you're attached? So again, not everything we do is because of attachment. We still live, we still breathe, we still speak, we still work. We do many things that don't necessarily have to be because of attachment. Attachment is only a small part of our experience. It's an important part, but it's only part of it. Once you have no attachment, doesn't mean you stop doing things. So it's a really simple answer, but I think it's important. Okay, here's a return questioner, not satisfied with my answer. Maybe I dismissed it. We're going to try again. So, but your question is still the same, really. I remember the question. It's determining what should be noted takes up so much time that it seems so much more useful to just try and stay present without noting. So again, useful for what? I mean, noting has a purpose. It's meant to change the way you look at the experience, to remind you that the thing is what it is. You talk about throughout the day. So throughout the day you don't have to note everything. So your clarification helps, because the point is, you feel that meditation in certain instances gets in the way. Well, gets in the way of what? Of living your life? Okay, then you're going to have to sometimes live your life, talking to people, working, and so on, and sometimes meditate. Does it get in the way of being enlightened? No, it leads and it helps and it supports you. But if you wanted, you're taking this to the logical conclusion that we should always be doing that. Well, yeah, if you're enlightened, or if you're in a situation where you're not really concerned about living your life in terms of other practices, then when you talk to people, you can say talking, or feeling, or hearing, or so on, and not have to worry about it. Another thing that you might be experiencing is sort of this beginner forced state, because it's new. Over time, you can really be mindful and still think and allow your mind to continue. It's just, it doesn't jive with the way your mind works as a non-meditator. So it appears to get in the way of just ordinary functioning, and it doesn't really, or it shouldn't, but it takes some skill to get to that point where it doesn't. And I mean, really, again, not something you should really worry about. Do what you can during the day, but save the constant and repeated and systematic mindfulness for when you're actually doing a formal practice. Until you come to do a meditation course. When you're in a meditation center, of course, there shouldn't be much talking at all, so you have lots of time to be methodical throughout the day. I hope that's a better answer. If not, come back next week. We're down to 10 questions. Looks like some new ones, yep. Cheaters. Well, it's a problem also because it's not a really problem, but they're not sorted according to likes, which isn't really a problem. Problem is it's never ending, and then I'll never leave. So we have to cut off somewhere. I want to know if I should say to myself, thinking every time I fall into thoughts, after I already notice, even though you've noticed too late. So saying thinking is to remind you that was just thinking. It's not to catch it as it happens, per se. It's just an after-the-fact reminder. That's how the mindfulness works. So absolutely, as soon as you know that you were thinking, you can say thinking, or you can also say knowing. Because that's immediate. You just knew that you were thinking, so right then the next thing you do is say knowing. That also works. But it keeps you from any reactions that might come from it. Question about body and Vedanas. And I think you're overthinking things. I read through your question. The way we understand it is, you're technically trying to find the nature of things, and I think as a result, it's like quantum physics when the observation changes. What I mean by that is your investigation is changing. You're looking at closer and closer, trying to find what is a feeling really, and suddenly it's not a feeling anymore, it's something else. Because of your investigation changes it. So when you feel pain, that's pain. That's under feelings category. Again, it's only experience. It's not how you investigate. What is this really? Because by the time you've said that, it's something new. But at the moment you feel pain, there's no question that is pain. When you feel happy, there's no question that is happiness. When you feel calm, there's no question that is calm. It doesn't matter deeper what it is. There is no deeper. It has no depth to it. It is what it is. When you feel hot, that's physical sensation. When you feel cold, when you feel tension, when you feel flaccid, when you feel hardness, when you feel softness, those are physical. Those are under rupa. So the tension in the stomach, the tension is rupa. But if it feels, And another thing is every experience has Vedana in it. So technically, this, when you say rising, there is Vedana, there is feeling there, but that's not what we're focused on. Satipatthana are practical. They're not ultimate reality exactly. They're more of a convention. So when you feel pain, that's when you say pain. And thoughts as well are not physical. You're trying to say that thoughts are feelings, but that's only because you're investigating them. And by the time you've investigated, it's no longer a thought. Thought is thought. There's no question. It is thought. It's not anything deeper, anything behind it. It is what it is. And that's important. In Buddhism, we take things as they are, not trying to investigate some kind of deeper knowledge. So I think that's an answer to your question, but you're welcome to resubmit it. If I can ever get rid of it. I'm not able to get rid of any questions now. It's just lots of buttons for me to press. Okay, they're going. Good. Gone. How does someone feel compassion without being attached? I think you're confusing with empathy. Compassion is seeing someone... No, that's not true, I suppose. Compassion is when you see someone suffering, the motivation to help them out of suffering. And in some ways it's just natural. It's the proper response. But there are ways to cultivate it. I mean, the real reason for cultivating compassion is because you're a cruel person who doesn't care about other people. And that's a problem. So compassion can help to balance you out. It can also be used as a sort of means of tranquility. So if you just focus on being compassionate, this state of compassion is very peaceful. Some people think they're enlightened when they have lots of compassion. It's good, but I'm saying that because there are schools of Buddhism and there are Buddhists in our tradition even who are very much into compassion, which is not a bad thing, but it can be, you can't overestimate its value. It's a good thing, it's just not ultimately the ultimate good. Here's a question, someone bugging me about the Dhammapada. No. I haven't been doing the Dhammapada because it's end of term and I just would rather do one thing at a time, and I'm writing a paper on beyond good and evil in Christian mysticism. I'm tearing down Christianity. Not exactly, but I'm bringing to light some of the, it's not even a critical paper against it, it's just outlining the philosophies behind one Christian mystic that relate to goodness and how there's this idea of going beyond it. Anyway, there are some interesting Buddhist issues there, so it's not totally off base. So plans for another series? No, I don't make those sorts of plans. The Dhammapada is, I have plans for the Dhammapada only because I know that next week I have to do, or as soon as I get back to it, the next week I'll have to do the next verse. That's my plan there. Once it's done, well, we'll see. Maybe I'll make another plan, but when I get to 423, if I don't die first, there will be no next number. So that plan will be done. And if I die first, it'll be done as well. In regards to mindfulness practice in daily life, I don't know if I read this one. I found I need to direct my noting out, yes, to my body. Yeah. So my mind doesn't identify and chase my thoughts. So in daily life, yes, that's a good strategy. You can be mindful of thoughts, especially if you're really distracted. You can say distracted. But a good strategy in daily life is don't worry so much about it. Focus on the body. standing, walking, sitting, lying. If you can remember those four, that's a great practice during your day. What am I doing? Oh, I'm sitting now, so I know that I'm sitting. Say sitting, sitting. And also, if you want to push further, you can say bending, stretching, reaching. When you brush your teeth, brushing. When you eat your food, chewing, and swallowing. But that's advanced. I wouldn't worry too much about it in the beginning. As you get better at it, of course, start to be concerned with that. And also the senses, seeing, hearing, and so on. But as far as if the thoughts is just too much, fine, go back to the body, that's great. It's going to differ for different people as well, but for some people the body is a good object. For other people, well, the mind is maybe, they find it a better object, but they're all good. None is better than another. Except the body is easier, so it's going to be stronger during the day. We want to be more refined during a formal practice, but during the day, your best strategy is to start with the body, and everything else is a bonus. Oh, I'm starting to answer the new questions. These are all new questions. Half an hour, that's cut off. You had a whole week to ask them, so these ones get relegated to next week. Is that mean of me? I don't care. That's all for tonight. Thank you all for tuning in. Have a good night. Have a good week.